Welcome to Giving an Answer, the show dedicated to defending the historic Christian faith. I am your host, Harold Felder, and today the topic is the relationship between faith and reason. And to discuss this with me, I have Professor Jason Reed. Let me give you his background. He has an undergraduate in philosophy from Iowa State University, a Master's of Art in Apologetics from Southern Evangelical Seminary. He's a doctoral candidate at St. Louis University, and he's also professor of philosophy at Southern Evangelical Seminary. So welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
What did I leave out?
My family. I have been married to Holly Reed for 9 years. It's hard to believe, but 9 years we've been married. We have 3 beautiful girls, Lisa, age 6, Genevieve, age 4, Mary, 21 months. And I've been at Southern Evangelical. This will be my 2nd year as a professor. I'm originally from Iowa, and so this is a big change down here in the South, but we love it here, and I'm glad to be here.
Now, you're actually like teaching your children apologetics and philosophy, aren't you?
Yes.
I've been around them a couple of times when you've asked them
correct.
questions that
yeah, you go up
the average teenager wouldn't know.
You ask the 6-year-old, you ask Lisa, what is philosophy? She says, love of wisdom. And if you ask her, what is theology? She says, the study of God. And my girls ask tons of questions about faith and reason and philosophy. They want to know, how does God see if he doesn't have any eyes?
That's a good question.
They're great questions. Is God up in the sky? How can God be everywhere? Can God see what's in my brain? Can God see my blood? I mean, these are things that the 6- and 4-year-old ask. They always ask questions about hell and heaven. Yeah, it's great. So yeah, we do it all the time.
Wow, that's great. That's great. So let's get to the topic.
All right.
So first, let's establish what is faith.
Okay, well, one thing faith is not blind. Faith is not what many people think it is. Faith, for many people, think that it's sort of like tape or some sort of glue that fills in our ignorance. Faith is not that. Faith is not something that overcomes ignorance. What faith is, historically, as far as Christianity is concerned, there are 3 aspects to faith. The first thing that comes to faith is the content of our beliefs. What is it? What does the faith teach? The second part of faith is its truthfulness or its veracity, the fact that the content itself is true. And then the third aspect for faith is trust, that we believe in it. And so actually faith, the 3 aspects of faith, 2 of those 3 are mental or deal with the intellect. It's only the third aspect of faith that deals with any sort of believing or trust. Okay,
then the next question is, what is reason?
Reason is a God-given, that might sound foreign to some, but it's a God-given faculty. It's a God-given faculty or power or instrument by which we can understand the world, we can understand truth, we can have knowledge, and so it's not an authority. I mean, what the modern mind thinks of reason, like if you go to the many university campuses, reason is seen as one of 2 ways. One is it's seen as the judge. And so if the Bible can't answer reason's demand, it's found guilty. And so it's an authority. It judges everything versus an instrument to help us find. The second view is that reason is sinister. There's some people who believe that reason is bad, and you should not think. You shouldn't try to find things out. You should just believe. We focus on feelings, love, relationships. And so reason, what it is, it's not those things. It's not something to be scared of. It's not something that we have to be under. Reason is a tool, much like a carpenter's tool, to find truth. It's given to us to find out what's going on.
Now, these are very important things, faith and reason.
Mm-hmm.
What has been some of the different views of the relationship between the 2 of them?
Okay, well, the first view is what's called a theologism. Okay, now in philosophy, there's a lot of big words for very simple ideas. And theologism is basically, put the cookies on the bottom shelf, it's because God has spoken, I no longer have to think. That's the view. And that is the view that faith is over reason. Faith, so if, for example, there are cults out there who do this. There are cults who say, even though my religious book says something that's rationally is absurd and crazy, I'm going to believe it anyway. Why? Because faith is more important than reason. So you've got people who have that view, that whatever faith teaches, it doesn't matter what reason. So let's say your book told you had a religious book, and it tells us that this table is real, or is not real, that this is an illusion. Because there are books out there. There are religious books that teach us that the world around us is an illusion, no matter what reason is. And so it doesn't matter what reason does, because my faith teaches me something, I reject it out of hand. Then there's another view that switches that reason is what's authoritative. Reason is that which tells faith what to do. And so you've got the modern philosophers who say, you know what, you Christians believe in the incarnation. You believe that Jesus Christ is God and man. That's absurd. You Christians believe that God's three persons and one God. That's absurd. Christians believe that a God can write an infallible book, the Bible, through fallible means, namely human beings. That's absurd. So this view puts reason, what's called rationalism. There's the theologism. Rationalism is a fancy word for saying reason is what is the judge, and faith submits to it. Those are the two dominant views in our culture, probably. I submit to you.
What are some of the most common misconceptions people have then about the relationship?
Well, those misconceptions are driven by those two views, because, let's say you're in the, like many college students, or if you've been to college, you've taken a science class. Okay, and people think that when I'm in the science classroom, I just turn off my faith, right? And so people think that faith and reason are so in conflict or incompatible that if I'm doing something with my mind, then I leave my faith at the door. If I'm doing something, so Monday through Friday, when I'm in the university campus in my lab or I'm studying, Christianity is irrelevant. Okay, why? Because now I'm doing things that deal with reason or intellect. But then when Sunday comes along, I get rid of my mind, I just focus on my feelings and my beliefs, but why? Because that's faith. So the misconception is that I have to turn my mind off when I have faith and turn my faith off when I turn my mind on. That's a huge misconception based upon these views, namely that somehow they cannot go together.
But sometimes there seems to be certain instances in the Bible that sort of can be problematic. For instance, when God told Abraham, you and Sarah are going to have a baby by this time next year, and they're like 100 years old. So should Abraham have not believed him? Should he have used his reason and say, I don't think so?
Actually, it's by Abraham using his reason he was able to believe it. It's actually Sarah was not listening to reason, is the reason why she laughed. Why? Because reason can only operate given a certain belief. And so the reason why something might seem irrational is because of belief that you have, not because of reason. And so if you believe Genesis 1:1, that God created the world out of nothing, then what's so irrational, illogical about God helping an older person in age have a child? It isn't. There's nothing irrational about it. Once you believe that God can do the miraculous, then it's very reasonable to believe that that would happen. So they were irrational. They weren't rational.
So you're making a very interesting point, because you're saying that they're actually, if God exists, if God can do miracles, then to not believe him is irrational, even if he says something that seems impossible.
Well, it doesn't. It seems impossible for me to do it. See, this is the false assumption. You're not doing it. God wasn't saying that you're going to have a child, Sarah, naturally. That would be absurd, right? That would be absurd. But that's not what he said. He just said you're going to have a child, and he's promising it. If God promises something, it's going to happen. Here's another example of how they were already irrational prior to this. God told Abram, prior to changing his name, that he's going to make him into a great nation, right? This is in Genesis 12. I'm going to go to the land that I send you. I'm going to turn you a great nation, through his family. Well, instantly, Abram disbelieves God because they're taken in by Pharaoh. He says, he's going to kill me. Now, wait a minute. Abram, God told you something. And that something, namely, you're going to be made into a great nation. It's impossible for that to happen and Abraham kill you. So Abram is irrational. And this is what's very interesting. Lack of faith is irrational. The increase in faith is rational. This is how they are what's called compatible. The greater reason grows, faith grows with it. The less faith grows, reason goes down with it. They're distinct, mind you. They're not the same thing, but they are coextensive. That is, one goes with the other. And we see that Abraham learns this, or Abraham learns that they're compatible. How does he learn that? Well, the commentary by the writer of Hebrews tells us, because when he's asked to give up his son, He does it by faith. Why? Because he had reasoned that God could raise the dead.
Yeah.
So faith and reason are the same, are different aspects of the same situation. So it's very reasonable for us. It's actually and to give you a personal experience from my own life. We lost our first baby before I was born. We lost our first child. Now, of course, what's happening? Emotions are running rampant, right? Emotions are running rampant, and we're upset. How could God do this? What's going to happen? Now, reason, the rational thing to do is to trust God, right? That's the rational thing to do.
Right.
And because that's the rational thing to do, if I don't trust God, I lack faith. If I'm upset with God, if I don't think I'm going to, are we ever going to see our child again? How could you do this? The more I'm lacking faith, the more irrational I'm becoming. And so the rational thing to do is to trust God. He says, you're going to see your loved ones again. This is not it. Jason and Holly, this is not the end of the story. You've got to believe it's why. Hebrews 11. By faith, we are certain, that the things of the unseen. We are certain of the things unseen. Why? Not because we're blind, not because we can't see it. It's by reasoning. Because first premise, God says, God is truthful. God cannot lie. God tells us about things that we can't see. And therefore, that we can be certain about the things we can't see. Why? Because God's told us. The rational thing is to believe him. Why? Because the truth of the matter is he's not going to lie. And so actually that was comforting to us. It's by reasoning, just like Abraham, that we increased our faith. It made more sense to believe. Because remember, faith is not a blind. Faith isn't something that's irrational. Faith is this. If God tells me something, I believe it. I can't prove it. I can't take what God says and put it into a test tube. I can't get out my shovel and dig it up necessarily. I can't dig up heaven. But God tells us something, and faith is, are you going to believe it or not? And that's an act of will. No one can force you into that. And so how do I have that sort of trust? The more reasonable something is, the more trustworthy it is. And so actually, in a certain sense, it's easier to have faith, the more rational something is.
So you have two views on the relationship between faith and reason. You mentioned those, and I think one you said is that
faith is superior to reason.
Right.
The other one, that reason is superior to faith.
What's the most common view today, and why?
Well, both. Depends on who you're asking. In more secular societies, in our culture, we have people who are more mystical, people who emphasize, the personal, who emphasize the relational, to emphasize the feelings. For them, faith is much more important than the reason. Why? Because reason is not as important as love. Reason isn't as important as relating. And so you have mystics who say you get to truth by feeling it. Okay, so that's that one view. The other side is the more scientific-minded. You have a background in science. So if you were, from your background, if you stayed non-Christian, you probably have more the reason side. If faith can't pass the reasonable test, right, I'm not going to believe it. Right. And so those who say, the scientific-minded, those who think that they're more empirically minded, that I got to see it to believe it. They put reason above. And so you have really both. I would say probably in the 70s, there's probably more of the reason being over faith. Why? Who is the most popular talk show host? Phil Donahue. Phil Donahue is a secular humanist. He believes in reason and science. Who's the most popular person today? It's Oprah. What does Oprah teach? And she's into, you watch her show, it's into relationships and the feeling and succeeding at life. And so you've got these two camps. People who are more like a Phil Donahue sort of person, you've got to give me evidence and we got to argue it. The more Oprah, no offense to these groups, but more Oprah Winfrey, it's more about love and service and feeling good about ourselves and feeling good about the lives we're living. So it's those two camps typically disagree on that relationship.
Professor Reed, what does God really want from us? Because I can say, well, God, I need proof. You need to show me something. And God says that we're supposed to use our reason because he gave us reason. But then also he says, I want you to believe. I want you to have faith. So it seems to me that it's really not that easy to balance the two. I mean, how much faith am I supposed to exercise and how much reason am I supposed to exercise? How am I supposed to balance the two?
Well, first of all, Jesus tells us if we have faith as small as a mustard seed, we can move a mountain. So it doesn't take a whole lot of faith. Why? Because we have God.